Donald Trump performs U-turn on tariffs on most countries, but adds new tariff to China. Beijing criticizes the U.S. over the new tariffs, but does not announce new tariffs. Financial markets, including China and Hong Kong, rebound. Hello and welcome to TVB News. I'm Melissa Hekalea. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a significant U-turn on his tariff policy shortly after his Liberation Day duties kicked in at midnight on Wednesday. Trump placed a 90-day pause on most of his new tariffs while raising levies on Chinese imports to a staggering 125%. Danny Zhou tells us more.
According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, the U.S. tariffs on virtually all countries would be lowered to the baseline 10% during the pause. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Donald Trump talked about the reversal and said nothing is over yet, in hopes of reaching deals with countries subject to the so-called reciprocal tariffs.
Can you walk us through what you were thinking about why you decided to put a 90-day pause?
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
Trump explained he mocked the pause for the people that didn't retaliate. He claimed more than 75 countries had called U.S. representatives to negotiate a solution on trade, tariffs, and currency manipulation.
On Monday, you said no pause, but today there is a pause. So, how can people believe your word today?
It's not a question of that. You have to have flexibility.
But the situation differs for China. In a statement posted on Truth Social, Trump raised the tariff charge to China to 125%, effective immediately, citing China's so-called lack of respect for the global markets. The decision was made hours after Beijing imposed an 84% retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods. Amid the dramatic standoff between two of the world's largest economies, the U.S. president surprisingly struck a conciliatory tone towards Beijing, praising President Xi Jinping and predicting a very good deal.
I'm not concerned. I think President Xi is a very smart guy, and I think we'll end up making a very good deal for both.
He also left open the possibility of talks.
I think that President Xi is a man who knows exactly what has to be done. He's a very smart man. He loves his country. I know that for a fact. I know him very well. And I think he's going to want to get to a deal. I think that's going to happen. We'll get a phone call at some point, and it'll be off to the race.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent criticized China's tariff escalation. Bessent warned Beijing not to attempt to devalue RMB in retaliation for the fresh round of U.S. tariffs, saying this would spur the rest of the world to keep raising their tariffs to offset devaluation. CNN and Wall Street Journal reported that prior to Trump's pause announcement, there was growing alarm inside the U.S. Treasury Department about accelerating a sell-off in the U.S. government bond markets. The price of U.S. Treasury bonds fell sharply. It triggered further concerns foreign nations were abstaining from buying new U.S. Treasury bonds and selling the debt they had. Sources familiar with the matter said, although Trump acknowledged the chance of a recession with the tariffs already in place, he has indicated there is no way to plunge America into another depression. Danny Zhou, TVB News.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning reposted a video of Mao Zedong, a former leader of the Chinese Communist Party, on a social media platform, stressing the Chinese are not afraid of provocation. A mainland economist also warned the tariffs will weaken the competitiveness of American tech companies in the long run. Jackie Lin reports.
Responding to the fresh round of tariff hikes from the U.S. on Chinese imports, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning reposted on social media platform X, showing a video of Mao Zedong saying it was up to U.S. Presidents Harry Truman and Eisenhower, or whichever future president of the United States, to decide how long they want the fight to last. She wrote the caption in English that reads, "We are not afraid of provocations, we don't back down." Within 4 hours, she reposted another video featuring former U.S. President Ronald Reagan.
America's most recent experiment with protectionism was a disaster for the working men and women of this country. When Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930, we were told that it would protect America from foreign competition and save jobs in this country. The same line we hear today. The actual result was the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in our history.
In Beijing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said Thursday that the latest tariff hike from the U.S. is tantamount to acts of extortion and threats. He said if the U.S. insists on a tariff war, China will respond resolutely. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce meanwhile said it will help import-export trade companies facing difficulties to expand their business in the domestic market. Economist Professor Cui Fan of the University of International Business and Economics said U.S. tech firms have set up factories around the world, and the tariff policies could ratchet up their shipment costs. The relocation of these overseas production plants back to the United States would also encounter difficulties, including the lack of suitable labor in the U.S., which could compromise the competitiveness of American high-tech companies overall. Cui expects the U.S. domestic market continues to weaken with a shrinking consumer power. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
At a World Trade Organization meeting, China voiced grave concern about the U.S. tariff mayhem and its detrimental impact globally. The sentiment was shared by dozens of other WTO members. The WTO chief has warned the spiraling trade tensions between Washington and Beijing may severely damage the world's economic outlook. Danny Zhou reports.
The Chinese mission sent a statement to WTO members at a meeting on trade and goods on Wednesday. The statement read, "The situation has dangerously escalated, and China expresses grave concern and firm opposition to this reckless move." The Chinese representative pointed out the U.S. is a founding member and major beneficiary of the WTO-centered multilateral trading system. The statement said the unilateral reciprocal tariffs imposed by the American government are misguided and counterproductive, and they have surpassed the bound tariff rates in the U.S.'s WTO commitment. It said the approach not only fails to resolve trade imbalances, but will eventually backfire on the U.S. itself. China also called the Trump administration's discriminatory tariffs a serious breach of the most favored nation principle, and said this represented the U.S.'s unilateralism, protectionism, and economic coercion. With a pledge to defend its own legitimate rights, China has called for settling differences through multilateral dialogue and cooperation. State media reported that 46 WTO members, including the European Union, Japan, and Canada, expressed concerns about the U.S. tariffs. Beijing's Commerce Ministry filed a new complaint to the WTO over Trump's bullying tactics on April the 9th. The organization's Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, said the growing trade tensions between the U.S. and China could pose a significant risk of a sharp contraction in bilateral trade, which would also affect other economies. Danny Zhou, TVB News.
World markets soared on Thursday, with Japan's benchmark jumping more than 9%. This as investors welcomed U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to put his sharp tariff hikes on hold for 90 days, though he excluded China from the reprieve. But even mainland and Hong Kong stocks rose. Daniel Rell tells us more.
Asian stock markets recovered on Thursday after U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff trauma. Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 jumped 9.1%, zooming upwards as soon as trading began. The Shanghai Composite Index rose 1.2%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index added 2.4%. Australia's S&P ASX 200 soared 4.5%. South Korea's Kospi gained 6.6%. Analysts had expected the global comeback. This given US stocks had one of their best days in history as investors registered their relief over Trump's decision, with the S&P 500 surging 9.5%. The relief came after doubts had crept in about whether Trump cared about the financial pain the US stock market was taking because of his tariffs. That surprised many professional investors who had long thought a US president who used to highlight records for the Dow under his watch would pull back on policies if they sent markets reeling. However, an analyst said uncertainty is likely to linger over financial markets for some time.
Everything is still very volatile because with Donald Trump, you don't know what to expect because this is really big uncertainty in the big market. The threat of recession has not faded. And one of the most important indicators is that U.S. interest rates are spiking because people fear that China will unload $1 trillion worth of U.S. Treasury bills. And that will bring chaos to the global financial market if China decided to dump U.S. treasuries in the market. And U.S. interest rate could well spike to 5 or 6%. And in addition to the inflation, threat of inflation. So everything is still in a state of flux, and the market is still in a turmoil. We don't know what to expect next.
Daniel, TV News.
China's 84% tariff on U.S. goods took effect at noon. So how will this impact Hong Kong? Some mainland tourists said Hong Kong will remain a popular destination for them to purchase tax-free goods, thanks to the city's status as a duty-free port. Timothy Lee reports.
Hong Kong has long been a shopping paradise for many mainland travelers who wish to be exempted from duties when buying imported goods. In the face of Washington's rising tariff policy targeting China, some mainland tourists said their desire for shopping in the city is only growing stronger. This tourist says she may ask her relatives or friends in Hong Kong to help her purchase skincare products. This traveler emphasized many mainland tourists will continue to buy imported goods here in the future, given the local tariff policy remains unchanged. Among the most prominent American goods entering the Chinese market over the past few years is beef, with a number of residents predicting American beef exporters will shift their sales focus to Hong Kong in the near future. Some in the local food sector noted the situation pertaining to American beef imports is different from the mainland's previous ban on Australian lobsters. Hong Kong Food Council Chairman Hui Wai-kin said that unlike lobsters, there are far more alternatives for beef imports other than the U.S., such as Australia or Eastern Europe. He questioned whether consumers should stick with American beef products when Washington is clearly engaging in a trade conflict with China. Meanwhile, Hong Kong has become the sixth biggest market for U.S. wine exports in recent years, with many products re-exported to the mainland. Some representatives from the entrepot sector voiced their concerns about the mainland's lack of interest in importing American wine after the trade war. This manager of a company that re-exports U.S. wine said many in the mainland see scores of other countries as viable alternatives for wine imports. He said he may have to offer big discounts to sell American wines. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Still ahead, authorities launch measures to combat money laundering crimes that use mule bank accounts. Beijing said Chinese citizens should not be involved in wars after claims there were Chinese soldiers in the Ukraine war. Speaking in Panama, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth criticizes China's military presence in the Western Hemisphere. Welcome back. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, in collaboration with the police and the Hong Kong Association of Banks, are launching a number of measures to combat money laundering crimes that use so-called mule bank accounts. Jackie Lin with more.
Last year, the city recorded more than 44,000 fraud cases, with multiple arrests related to individuals selling or lending their mule or stooge accounts to criminal groups to receive and launder proceeds. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, alongside the police and the Hong Kong Association of Banks, are rolling out several initiatives to crack down on that. They include providing banks and stored value payment service operators with more access to data from anti-fraud platform Scameter, including bank account numbers, phone numbers, and email addresses. The banking industry can also tap the fraud monitoring system to flag suspicious accounts and continuously monitor them. If suspicious transactions are detected, potential victims will be alerted immediately and the police will be notified. The HKMA has proposed amendments to the banking ordinance to allow banks to share relevant information among themselves under a designated mechanism if accounts or transactions are suspected to involve prohibited activities. They aim to pass the amendments in the Legislative Council by the end of the year. Starting today, circulars will also be issued and updated from time to banks to share good industry practices in detecting new bank accounts.
We are very pleased that the Hong Kong Association of Banks has established a special task force comprising 18 banks to join us in spreading this important message of beware of fraud and not to lend sell bank accounts.
The police, meanwhile, will seek to increase the sentencing of convicted stooge account holders from the court. As of April, 95 stooge account holders have had their sentence extended by 13 to 33%, with prison terms ranging from 21 to 75 months. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the police force are holding a series of seminars and community outreach activities this month. They're also targeting the elderly and foreign domestic helpers in a bid to raise their awareness towards the risks of lending their bank accounts to others. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
The police's National Security Department brought in the parents of national security fugitive Francis Hui for investigation. Hui is among some 20 fugitives suspected of national security offenses that authorities have issued a bounty for. Hui's parents were seen leaving the Tin Sum police station in Sha Tin after the investigation. Her father was then brought to the Ma On Shan police station to assist with an investigation afterwards. 26-year-old Francis Hui was a former member of the now defunct activist group Scholarism. She was suspected of colluding with foreign powers and endangering national security and is currently residing in the U.S. China's foreign ministry called for a sober view of its role in the Ukraine crisis when asked about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's claims that Chinese citizens are involved in the war. Beijing said the Chinese government always asks Chinese citizens to stay away from conflict zones. Daniel Rao reports.
China's foreign ministry has addressed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statement that Ukrainian soldiers engaged 6 Chinese military personnel on the front line in the Ukrainian Donetsk region, with 2 of them being captured. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said China is verifying the relevant situation with Ukrainian officials. Ukrainian media quoted Kyiv documents as saying there are at least 163 Chinese in the Russian forces. Lin stressed the Chinese government always asks Chinese citizens to stay away from conflict zones, avoid getting involved in any form of armed conflict, and especially refrain from participating in any party's military operations. Lin said China's position on the Ukraine crisis is to seek peace and has been widely recognized by the international community. The spokesperson said Ukraine should correctly view China's efforts and constructive role in politically resolving the Ukraine crisis. On the battlefield, 10 people were injured after Russian drones struck the southern city of Mykolaiv overnight from Wednesday into Thursday. Drones damaged 9 residential buildings and other civilian properties. The Ukrainian State Emergency Service said its rescuers pulled a mother and 3 children from under the rubble. Overall, the Ukrainian Air Force said Russia fired 145 Shahed drones and decoy drones overnight, targeting at least 6 regions of Ukraine. The Air Force added 85 drones were destroyed by air defenses. Daniel Rao, TVB News.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is on a visit to Panama. He focused again on China's presence in the Western Hemisphere. Panama's government has, however, reiterated it won't accept U.S. military bases on its soil. Daniel Rao has details.
Speaking at a regional security conference in Panama, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said China-based companies were controlling land and critical infrastructure in strategic sectors. He also criticized China's military presence in the Western Hemisphere.
China's military has too large of a presence in the Western Hemisphere. They operate military facilities and ground stations that extend their reach into space. They exploit natural resources and land to fuel China's global military ambitions. Make no mistake, Beijing is investing and operating in this region for military advantage and unfair economic gain.
He called on the region's governments to work together to deter China and address threats posed by transnational drug cartels and mass immigration. Hegseth was speaking a day after meeting Panama's President José Raúl Mulino and touring the Panama Canal. The 2 countries agreed to step up security coordination and appeared to say they would work towards a way to pay back fees that U.S. warships pay to pass through the Panama Canal. The visit comes amid tensions over U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated assertions the U.S. is being overcharged to use the Panama Canal, and China has influence over its operations, allegations that Panama has denied. Shortly after Hegseth and Molino met, the Chinese embassy in Panama criticized the U.S. government in a statement on X. It said Washington had used blackmail to further its own interests and that who Panama carries out business with is a sovereign decision of Panama and something the U.S. doesn't have the right to interfere in. The Chinese Foreign Ministry also criticized the U.S.'s attempts to smear China's reputation on the world stage. The Foreign Ministry said China urges the U.S. to stop maliciously linking China to the canal issue as an excuse to control the canal. Dan Orell, TV News.
A China-themed exhibition showcasing traditional culture and modern technology will be featured at the upcoming World Expo 2025 in Osaka, Japan. The event is set to kick off on Sunday. The 3,500 square meter China Pavilion will be among the largest international exhibitions at the Expo. The exterior of the exhibition prominently displays ancient Chinese scripts, while visitors can witness scenes from traditional Chinese paintings come to life via animation. Those interested in China's technological achievements can immerse themselves in the role of a crew member of a replica of the Jiaolong submersible. Revelers can also check out standout elements of Chinese culture and technology, such as lunar samples collected from Chang'e space missions and treasures from Dunhuang. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Good night.